Hello and welcome to our session on 5G and the path forward. The industry has made a pretty sizable investment in 5G, yet if you look at Omdia's data, we are seeing ARPU declining by 1.3% over the next 3 years. So our service providers have been investing in 5G GSA. We are seeing it. I'm from Ookla, and we're seeing it in the data. The data says that we see anywhere from 0 to 80% of the 5G share of samples. So when we're looking at all of our samples, some of them would be 16% on 5G GSA, some of them are 30%, some of them are 80%. There's a wide range of what we're seeing in deployment out there. So what we're going to dive into this session today is really looking at the trends. What are people doing as use cases? What are the challenges? Where are we going as an ecosystem? How are we deploying faster? That's going to be our topic for today. We're going to be bringing in a panel. We are going to have Steve Douglas, Head of Market Strategy at Spirent. And we are going to have Dejan Leskaroski, VP of Product Management Packet Core at Mavenir. Welcome. And also Suruchi Gupta, GM and Global Head of Ecosystem and Partnership at Wipro.
Thank you.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
All right. All right, so we've heard about use cases. We've heard about the economics behind all of this. So the first thing I'd like to kind of ask you is, there has been a journey. We had a standard way back. I can't remember how many years ago, but it's been several years. We had a standard, and we have been marching towards implementation. It has been a journey. Perhaps, Stephen, you can give us a little bit of your take on what it has taken to get from ideation to a reality that we have today.
Yeah, I mean, we started off with, and you put up the numbers earlier on, a non-standalone architecture at the beginning, which some people would argue maybe has been a bit of a mistake. It brought 5G radio capabilities out, primarily for a market. You could argue that the 5G standard was originally designed more towards enterprise, but initially bringing 5G non-standard out was more targeting towards consumer. And you could argue, our 4G networks are exceptionally good today. So what was the incremental value there? And the next iteration of it, the standalone iteration, which we're really only starting to see now get deployed and get the upgrades into the network, which brings the 5G core network in and all the capabilities that it can deliver in terms of the new surfaces, the efficiencies, the agility. It's actually been harder than a lot of the industry anticipated it would be, and really from two dimensions. One, you heard it from a business case dimension, to justify that additional investment. But the other one was from a technology investment around it as well, because we were moving to a cloud-native architecture to enable all of this new agility. And this was brand new for many, many of the operators that we work with. I remember going in, we're a big test company, and we were helping them sort of test this new architecture coming in. And there was a big discovery. It wasn't just the technology that was now challenging because of the cloud-native nature of it, but also the operational processes that have to go around it. How do you suddenly deal with something that's now more IT-orientated in terms of the number of software releases and upgrades coming, the configurations? How do we deal with the different cloud-native stacks that were involved in it? And of course, that technology challenge is also a commercial challenge. So you saw that there sort of phase coming into it. But I think we're now hitting a stage where you saw the leading operators have brought in 5G standalone. You're seeing the benefits actually starting to be demonstrated in the markets, both from the efficiencies and agility sides. We're seeing energy efficiency, we're seeing lower latency, we're seeing better spectral utilization, but we're also now, most interestingly, starting to see the use cases appear, which are starting to generate additional revenue. So you're starting to see that first wave of network slicing. Maybe it's being used for, say, first responder networks or emergency services. You're starting to see, coming this year, new capabilities around RedCap technology, so reduced capability for IoT. The device ecosystems appearing, the networks are being tested to prove that they can cope with it. So you're going to start to see that coming out into things like e-health and smart grids. You're also starting to see mission-critical communications starting to expand through using 5G standalone architectures as well, where you can have prioritized slices, as I said, not only for the first responders, but also for additional emergency services going into our future railway networks, which are all going through an evolution now to replace GSMA technologies. And on top of that, you're also seeing the air economy or the space economy starting to now come into it as well. Now, not necessarily a big revenue generator in day one, but enabled through the architecture of 5G standalone and then going into 5G advanced, where we're not only connecting satellites, but we're enabling drone economies as well. So a good example is in the Asia Pacific, you're seeing in the China market, large opportunities of enabling drones to fly beyond visual line of sight, enabled by 5G slices for command and control. This is huge revenue opportunities, and we're only at the cusp of that. So back to that number I would say you put up, I think it was 127 billion, or the first panel speaker said, that is actually potentially achievable by 2030, not by a single use case, but by a range of these use cases that are going to get enabled by standalone, and that's what we're seeing at the moment in the market. And the testing behind the scenes that we get involved with day to day is demonstrating many operators are now fast-tracking that process of moving faster to standalone and targeting specific use cases to start with for specific enterprises, but also for some of the consumer markets as well.
Yeah. And for these use cases to come together, I mean, it was a whole ecosystem that needed to evolve. It wasn't just the network, it was also the devices that were attached. I mean, you mentioned drones. My son is a pilot, and he's starting to have his license for that. And the reason they're using pilot for the drones license is because they're going to be out of line of sight, and they're going to need to be mixing with the airflow. So for these devices to be capable of operating within a slice so that it's guaranteed so you don't have accident, what did it take in terms of the ecosystem to come together?
I have to admit it's timing, and that was probably one of the big issues that I think we saw with the first early phase of 5G, was it, especially as you move into enterprises, the ecosystem, the device ecosystem was more prioritizing consumer devices.
Right.
Rightly so, smartphones, that's where the big market is. But the enterprise devices weren't there. Now you're starting to see the ecosystem appear where you're having the modules, the modems available. The devices are being, as I said, a lot of the testing is now validating them. They're becoming, for conformance. They're being certified. So you're starting to see that ecosystem appear. It's about getting the timing of them correct so they're simultaneously available. Otherwise, you can approach an enterprise with a great use case, and then you go back and you say, well, actually, we don't have any devices. There's no ecosystem there yet to provide that. That's going to be 18 months away.
Yeah.
So I think there's been a big focus now in terms of aligning that. And I think we're doing, as an industry, I think we're a lot better than that. And I think that's why I think this year you're really going to see 5G standalone kick off more into the enterprise space, because we've got the range of devices and we're getting more and more networks validated that they can deal with that volume of devices and enable those types of use cases. It's okay saying that I'm suddenly going to have, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of RedCap IoT devices saturating a cell. Can the cell cope with that? But also, can the network cope with that suddenly large amount of saturation of traffic coming? And all of that is now being tested and being proved out. So I think we're at the cusp of, personally, I think we're at the cusp of the real 5G revolution now. And I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, that's terrific. And Dejan, from your perspective, is that the ecosystem and the devices coming in, is that something you had to take into consideration at Mavenir?
The ecosystem plays a big role, but at the same time, so look, just take one step back, right? We talked about all these features. I saw URLC on the map, and let's be honest, 6 years ago we talked about URLC, we talked about V2X, we talked about all these things. There is slowness in the market, and if there is a right business case, things will move. And I agree, look, you have the big players in the vendor side, the big players on the carrier side, the big players on the ecosystem side. Yeah. So all of these features are important, but it almost has to be, okay, what is the end business case? I think the previous speaker kind of touched on that. The fortunate and unfortunate things, or the reality is that the initial 5G SA deployments were consumer-centric. I know, but unfortunately, that was not the goal of 5G SA. Of course, every carrier had to get and launch 5G SA or even 5G NSA, which is a separate topic that maybe we'll come back to, and I have opinion on that. But the initial kind of check mark, and more than a check mark, they had to make sure that the consumer market, now, to Steve's point, is that second wave, which is, okay, how do I address IoT? How do I address private networks? How do I address government? And I know we all have touched on it, but just to summarize mine, and I'll turn it over to others as well. One piece is the features. Now, just features themselves, the business case may or may not be there. Some may make a business case out of it. The second thing is the architecture. So there's almost like 1 + 1 + 1 hope to equal 3, maybe not exactly. So the other thing is the architecture. How do I enable both tier 1 operators, but also verticals, MVNOs, MVNEs, enterprises, to actually come in a market and be able to deploy in pilot. So features, it's one parallel. It is what it is. We may want to go faster, but sometimes there's different challenges. The second thing is the architecture. How do I enable a smaller operator to say, hey, I want to have a very small instance and I want to do global IoT. Maybe I'm a challenger to the status quo, so to speak. So those are the things. And the third thing, and again, I'm a core guy, so I'm disclosing that ahead of time. We talk a lot about 5G, which is correct on the RAN side. There's the whole 5G SA kind of evolution was to do with the core, especially the packet core. There's a lot of things in the packet core that were introduced specifically for 5G SA. It's not just network slicing, it's analytics, it's a wireless and wireline convergence, it's enhanced location services. These are new components in the network that we frankly have not paid attention to.
Absolutely. Anything we'd like to add, Suruchi, on this particular topic?
I will kind of piggyback on what he was saying, and probably it might allude to a question that you may ask me, that while we have understood that 5G SA is contributing towards an efficient, sustainable, and scalable futuristic network deployment, but there are challenges and there may be obstacles we might have to overcome to Dejan's point, to be able to deploy.
Any more that you can give us in terms of some of those challenges that you've observed specifically at
Yeah,
Wipro?
so to quick recap of what we all understood, that 5G SA will provide a cloud-native architecture. The 5G SA core is streamlined, so it's easy to deploy. The 5G RAN, the 5G radios, the sleep mode coupled with the AI can enable a faster deployment. So there's efficiency, there's sustainability, there's network slicing that's available to us right now. The end-to-end network and dynamic network slicing that provides the agility and the flexibility. However, all this also leads to the challenges are the devices available to us. The devices, I think you talked about drones. The devices may take a little bit more time to be on 5G SA. Then the edge infrastructure, are the operators investing enough in the 5G edge infrastructure so that it can be offered as a service to application providers? We can talk about partnerships and ecosystem that will be required for seamless integration. There are going to be multiple use cases, like an autonomous vehicle, that will require the industry sectors to collaborate a lot more. They'll require the stakeholders to come together and collaborate and partner. So they could be interest. They would have different priorities and complexities that they will require them to come together for that integration. So the existing infrastructure, legacy infrastructure, to come together and seamlessly integrate some of the challenges that we'll have to overcome for 5G SA.
Yeah, and for doing this, I mean, we're talking about AI, we're talking about many different types of technology. Are there some needs to change the skill set of some of so we're talking about cloud architecture, we're talking about AI. Do we need to change the skill set of our engineers that are deploying the network in order to be able to gain these features that we want to bring to market?
Do you want to take that?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. I mean, so yes. I mean, as I said, I mean, we've last year alone, I think we were involved with over 50 operators working with standalone testing, so they could launch hopefully in the next this year, maybe in the next 18 months. And the skill set is a bit of a challenge because you're now asking teams to have suddenly, cloud native skills. Security has become a really big topic now because you're now securing, in essence, a cloud IT stack as well. So it's not just, following it as additional types of security requirements coming into it. You've got operational processes, as I mentioned earlier on. The skill sets to how do you deal with an IT essence environment where the cadence of software releases coming from the suppliers is now 10 times faster than you've ever had to deal with. How do you deal with that when you've got a multi-vendor environment as well? Because you might have selected maybe 2 vendors for some of the cloud or some of the core network functions. You might have that cloud stack built with multiple suppliers and vendors as part of that. So all of a sudden you've got this requirement for you need people that are telco experts, cloud experts, security experts, now even AI experts coming into it. And the challenge is we're not the only industry who wants that skill set. The demand for those skills is right across a lot of other tech and enterprise industries, so it becomes quite a challenge for the industry to find that. I think one of the answers we're seeing a lot of the operators starting to focus in is automation technologies to actually aid in terms of their people where they maybe don't have that volume or depth of skill in their organization, where they can actually start to leverage more and more automation to actually manage some of the technology challenges where those skill sets or those human skill sets would have been needed. And we're seeing that more and more. So many of the operators we're working with today, for example, as they move to 5G standalone, have developed automation pipeline processes to manage sort of things like how can I get a software release from my supplier, my vendor, fast through my lifecycle process into operational environments and reduce the amount of potentially highly skilled people I need to do that. It's not easy. These are big programs, but I think that's one of the things we're sort of seeing where investment is sort of going towards.
I'll just add network APIs programmability also. So we have to ensure that there's global mobility for use case proliferation. The network API programmability is also a challenge that needs to be applicable.
That needs to be addressed as well. I mean, I remember myself as a product manager, I moved from the telco world to the enterprise world in supply chain during COVID. I can't tell you how fast we needed to generate software and update during the COVID time for this. And it required, for us, like me coming into that area, it required a completely different process because now we were not deploying 3 times a year, retesting everything, going into the lab and taking months to doing this. We needed to do this in weeks. So it's a skill set. It's also understanding what's possible, and it's changing the process behind the machine as well for doing this.
So I agree with everything. It is a skill set, but also, it's been, frankly, an excuse for some time. I'm sorry to say that because, look, a lot of telco people, 25, 30 years experience, they're the ones that brought in mobility, 2G, 3G. I always used to have saying like, oh, do you know 4G? And if you don't know 4G, I was like, it doesn't matter. Are you a good test engineer or not? Are you a good operational person or not? Don't get me wrong. There is different skill sets.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it is skills that you can learn.
Yes.
It's not I cannot move. In every tier 1 operator, I would say maybe even more than half of the stuff runs in clouds. Their billing, their CRMs, and all this stuff. So for whatever reason, telco is the special one. Yeah. I agree that there's a skill set. You have to educate your workforce.
Yes.
But frankly, if the vendor
capable.
does the right thing, actually should be simpler, not more complicated.
Yeah. Right.
So we should challenge each other, both vendors and operators, to say, look, yes, there are skills, but it's not impossible to overcome.
Absolutely, because the benefit is huge.
So the collaboration that is required for every stakeholder to come together to have that robust relationship is also as critical as skill set.
Terrific. Terrific. We're going to look at a different stakeholder into that ecosystem and how they're playing a role. How about the government? So we know that the government can mandate certain technology milestones. They can provide incentive. They can provide investment. So how is that helping the 5G SA progression?
So I'll give you my honest, there's... the government use case is a great because it kind of pushes and tests some of these latest capabilities. It's not just network slicing, it's mission critical, it's push to talk. Some of the government use cases are now dictating 5G SA roaming, which again, it's something that in consumer, it's there but not really used. I mean, I'm roaming right now. I don't care if it's 5G SA, just to be honest.
Yeah.
But the government, so the benefit of some of these use cases because, they're well funded. You can work with an operator to launch those services. But at the same time, they have these long proof of concepts and long market. So definitely the government, in addition to enterprise, and those are the use cases where 5G SA excels, where you can actually It's not just network slicing, it's providing private networks, especially in Europe, where you can do private networks across countries, part of the EU or NATO. So there's a lot of use cases in the government. The only drawback is, can we get those things going live and actually,
Fast
so a
enough.
lot of innovation, but we are yet there to kind of do mass deployments, in my opinion.
Yes.
I mean, maybe just to add to that, I mean, I have a bit of a double hat here. So I'm also an advisor for the UK government as part of some of their telecom activity. And there's a real double-edged sword with the government, because yes, at times it's good for them to sort of push and say we want 5G standalone coverage for a certain percentage of your population by X date. And that's a grand ambition. But you've got to have the reality that an operator, how do you help an operator achieve that? Because they don't have unlimited cash supplies. They're driven by the market. They're driven by, do they have the customers that allow them to do that? So you have to have that aligned also with some form of incentives to aid them on that journey as well. Because yes, they probably have the same idea. They would like to get to that point, but cash isn't unlimited.
It doesn't grow on trees.
It doesn't grow on trees. So I think there has to be sort of an alignment there. And I think, globally, I think we're doing a better job at sort of governments getting a better understanding what the value of, say, a 5G standalone networks could deliver for their economies. What they're not probably, and what we're not seeing, they're not necessarily in every market as good at understanding, well then how do I help an operator, my operators, deliver on that? How do I liberalize some of the planning laws? How do I make spectrum more available in ranges which are more useful for the operator without charging them some ridiculous amount of money, which in the long run is really offsetting the larger GDP you could have made by enabling that technology in your country. So I think that is a big topic area at the moment. I'm glad to say there's a number of governments are getting better at it.
Yeah.
But I think there's still a long way to go
on that front. All right, so cloud native architecture. I know that this has been something that we were striving to achieve. Do you feel that this is something that is helping us really accelerate the deployment of our use cases? Has it delivered on the promise?
So, so absolutely. So cloud native architecture is one of the key highlighted features for 5G standalone. That requires the hyperscalers to work with the operators, collaborate a lot more to be able to provide the 5G SA core specifically. And the features, yes, you can add on to it because you have 5G SA core, you'll agree with me. So, yeah.
So, yeah. Topic near and dear to my heart, but I'll make sure I summarize it in 1 or 2 minutes. So going back to what we said, look, it is a complicated, right? So you have the features. Again, we talked about the challenges, opportunity, and the feature. Why cloud and native matters. And by the way, there is a range of cloud. I know everybody's buzzword about 3 years ago was cloud native, now it's AI. There is a range of what does that mean to a vendor and an operator. If you look at even the 5G NSA, the real question is that 5G NSA on your legacy VM architecture, or is it 5G NSA on your cloud native architecture? And why does that matter? Because if you're still on the legacy architecture, to be frank, from a core perspective, you're basically running 4G network functions. So you're really yet to actually move to a cloud native architecture. Yes, it's virtualization, but the cloud native piece. It does matter in 5G SA, it's because of all the other aspects. If you cannot do the business case based on features only, then what are the other things? Is it operational savings? So again, we have to kind of add these little pluses together to actually drive the right use case. So operational, like, it is savings, but I have to teach other people to do Kubernetes. So it kind of, so then the next thing is like, okay, can I enable myself to actually leverage the cloud the way it's leveraged outside of telco? I can tell you from RAN is RAN. Even RAN, there is software that can be dynamic, but on the core side, especially IMS and voice, the networks are designed for your worst case scenario. And you have to do that, but in cloud, when you can actually apply elasticity, thank you, you can actually, now you're adding the value of 5G SA little by little. And the last one is, and I've seen this uptake, it's true in Europe, to some extent in the US. I think it's true in APEC as well. Can I lower the entry for the non-traditional telco as well as the thin MNOs or MVNOs to enter the market? Because frankly, more of that actually will drive innovation. So we have seen that where if I can enable a global IoT provider, if I can enable a niche private network, still has to use the RAN network from the MNO, but if I can enable them to enter the market, then actually kind of with challenges, innovation happens.
Right.
So that's why cloud native, again, I'm not just talking about moving things to the cloud, I'm actually talking about true cloud native.
The real, yes.
And
the real.
does it not enable the scalability to be in and out and up and down?
Exactly. I mean, I can tell you, there's so much more detail to this, and I know a lot of this concept work in other, yes, telco is complicated, yes, there is, but you have to challenge both on the vendor side, on the ecosystem side, on the carrier side, because this dynamic scaling are concepts that databases use, banks use, disaster recovery. We complicated telco, and if we continue to just do the same thing, we'll never get to what actually true cloud native promises to do.
And
Yes.
enables the use case innovation exponentially.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And the proof's out there. I was going to say the proof. No, but I just said that the proof is if you go and look at some of the big operators who have launched 5G standalone cores, cloud native cores. Look at the energy efficiency they've been saving. It's been demonstrated. We've seen in some markets it's over 25 to 30% compared to the 4G core. Latency reduction, and not just lower latency, better deterministic latency,
Yes.
more consistent, which is really a key value if you are going to go into the enterprise space. We've seen that there. Scalability, when you talk about as well, we've seen a number of the operators we're working with who've rolled it out, being able to dynamically scale it to target very specific new use cases so that they can go after those targeted slice, very small slice use cases you want to do, maybe run it up as a POC, as a proof of concept, use the new architecture to do that. If it's a success, you can easily scale it out at a very low cost because the architecture is there for it. And you're seeing this with a large number of the operators today. If anything, I would argue that operators should move faster to getting 5G standalone and the cloud native core in on a national level, not just some of the pockets of deployments that we're seeing today, because I think the real value that they can unlock at the bottom line is actually quite impressive from what we're seeing.
Okay.
The only thing I feel that the network slicing that he's mentioning when we are cloud native needs to be configured specifically in that particular slice, and there has to be service assurance, there has to be SLAs met, which is, I feel, another challenge and a bottleneck towards deployment.
Absolutely. Well, we have reached the end of our session. I would like to thank you on the panel for all of your insights in here. I'm looking forward, personally at UGA, I'm going to be watching, because we're going to be watching via the data, how is this adoption going? We know where it's at now. We are going to be watching over the next year how these use cases, the commercial models, the deployments, the fast deployment of software, and all of this is going to be enabling us to see an uptick into that difference, moving from just 5G NSA to 5G SA. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.